on finally making something useful out of Knowles, who has just been a dead weight around the neck of this company for years. But really good for you, sir.
Well, I understand, and thanks for your generosity of having Michael come join me. He's done a phenomenal job in this podcast, and it's been what we're doing every night, as you mentioned, is just as the impeachment trial ends. Right as it ends, I jump in a truck and head over to the studio, and we're recording it live right after the proceedings end, and the podcast. It's called Verdict with Ted Cruz. And it's just about a half hour of my thoughts of what occurred that was significant that day, what the evidence was, what the facts were, what the constitutional issues are, and I think it's substance and content that the mainstream media doesn't want to cover, and it's been incredible. We launched it 3 days ago, and as you noted, it's jumped to one of the top 10 podcasts in the country in a matter of 3 days, and that's been really encouraging as people have been coming to verdictpodcast.com, and they've been downloading it, or they've been going to Apple Podcasts and subscribing, and it's, I think people are hungry for substance. It's one of the reasons, Ben, you've got so many loyal followers and listeners because you engage in substance, and there are very few players out there that do that.
So, Senator Cruz, let's get into the substance of this impeachment. The Democrats have now completed their original case. Adam Schiff led the way. He said that the right matters was the way that he put it last night while pretending to be weepy. But in any case, Adam Schiff does this routine. Of course, this is being cheered on by the media. So where are the Democrats going wrong in this case? They're making the case, basically twofold case. One, that President Trump was leveraging the Ukrainians in order to dig up dirt on Joe Biden for purposes of 2020. And second, that President Trump was obstructing Congress by trying to stop his people from testifying and having his people reject subpoenas and apply to a court. The second one seems patently bizarre to me because that's just called how the process works. But the first one, the abuse of power, where are they going wrong?
Well, they're going wrong a lot of places, but let me focus on the most important, which is yesterday, I think, was a really consequential day in the trial because the House Democrats essentially threw Joe Biden under the bus. And then they may not have done so intentionally, but that was the effect of it. And here's why. They have built their case on the proposition that it is fraudulent, that it is frivolous to investigate corruption of Burisma. Burisma, as you know, is the Ukrainian natural gas company, very corrupt company, was paying Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, $1 million a year while his dad was vice president. And then Joe Biden was using his position as vice president to threaten to block $1 billion in aid to Ukraine unless they fired the prosecutor that was investigating Burisma, the company that was paying his son $1 million a year. The House Democrats made the case yesterday at great length that there's zero evidence of corruption, that any desire to investigate Burisma corruption and the extent to which it implicated Hunter Biden or Joe Biden is fraudulent, is a sham, is bogus. And I got to say, that argument is ludicrous. I mean, there is overwhelming, at least prima facie, evidence of corruption. And so on my podcast last night, I spent a half hour trying to walk systematically through the evidence of corruption. Why does that matter so much? Because any president has the authority and in fact, the responsibility to investigate serious instances of corruption. And in this case, there was more than sufficient reason for Donald Trump to ask that Burisma corruption be investigated, and it be investigated whether or not Joe Biden participated in that corruption. And what the Democrats are doing right now is exactly what they are accusing the president of, which is they're engaged in a cover-up because they don't want the American people to see the evidence of corruption concerning Burisma and Joe Biden.
Yeah, Senator Cruz, I am pretty amazed by the fact that Democrats keep suggesting that a bunch of witnesses they refuse to call in the House should be called in the Senate, but Hunter Biden absolutely under no circumstances should be called to testify about any of this. I mean, that is the president's main line of defense, and denying him his main line of defense seems like a bizarre move. As far as the actual defense that was presented by Democrats of Hunter and Joe Biden, which came to the fore yesterday, they are basically arguing a couple things. One, they're arguing that the firing of Victor Shokin was something that was being called for not only by Biden, but by virtually everybody in the West, that he was widely seen as corrupt and a problem, and that Biden was just going along with that. And two, they're arguing that Shokin was not actually investigating Burisma at the time, that the investigation into Burisma had been closed. Is there any merit to either of those arguments?
Well, look, there might be. It ought to be. We ought to hear the evidence, and we ought to consider it. But I can tell you the New York Times had reported that Shokin was investigating Burisma. I can tell you that Shokin had raided the home and seized the property of the Ukrainian oligarch that founded Burisma as a corrupt company. And Joe Biden, within days of the prosecutor raiding his home and seizing assets, called the Ukrainian president not once, not twice, but 3 times, and began publicly calling for the prosecutor to be fired. So there's an awful lot that on the face of it stinks. And the House Democrats don't want to discuss any of it. And I got to say, one of the sort of inadvertently funny moments yesterday was when the House managers were arguing that well, in our hearings of the 17 witnesses we called, there was no evidence of Burisma corruption. And what's so screamingly funny is, well, that's because they only called prosecution witnesses. They blocked the president's witnesses. So, look, the president's team wanted to call Hunter Biden, and Adam Schiff of the House Democrats said, no, you can't call defense witnesses. They blocked Devin Archer, who's a business partner of Hunter Biden's, also on the board of Burisma. Together, the two of them made millions. The Democrats blocked them, and so they literally prevent the witnesses from testifying that could have testified to the corruption. And they stood up there and said, well, gosh, our prosecution witnesses didn't talk about the corruption. It was absurd, and it goes right to the heart of why the end of this case is going to be final judgment and a judgment of acquittal for the president, because the Democrats have patently failed to meet the constitutional standard of high crimes and misdemeanors.
We're speaking with Senator Ted Cruz. Senator Cruz, one of the most telling moments so far in this whole silliness was Adam Schiff getting up there and expressing that the American people should not have a chance to vote on this, that the American people cannot be given a chance to vote on President Trump, that he should not be on the ballot, because if he is on the ballot, then the election will be stolen. He also suggested, of course, the judiciary should not get to weigh in on the subpoenas that are being actually not even issued by the House, because if the judiciary were to weigh in, then it would carry past the 2020 election. I mean, didn't they just let the cat out of the bag over the last few days? That what is happening here is that they just don't want Trump on the ballot in 2020. And also they're setting the stage for, if Trump wins, claiming that the election is illegitimate, which would be no different than 2016, 2000 Georgia race with Stacey Abrams. I think we're getting to a dangerous point in American politics where Democrats really are refusing to acknowledge the results of any election they lose.
It is a very dangerous point. And, I'm glad that Comrade Schiff and the Democrats are trying to relieve the American people of the burden of democracy. And for anyone who didn't catch it, that was very tongue-in-cheek. What they're trying to do is overturn not one, but 2 elections. Number one, they're trying to overturn the 2016 election. That the congressional Democrats are angry with the American people that we voted for Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton. But they're secondly, and you just referenced it, trying to impact and overturn the 2020 election. They're trying to remove Donald Trump's name from the ballot in 2020. And the reason is real simple. They're afraid if the American people get the vote, that they'll vote to reelect President Trump. And so this is all about saying, you, the American people, in the view of the congressional Democrats, are too stupid to decide who your president should be. Instead, the congressional Democrats are going to abuse the Constitution, abuse the impeachment process to take that choice away from you so you can't vote for Donald Trump. And I got to say that is both offensive and a complete perversion of how the Constitution was meant to operate.
Senator Cruz, one of the things that's been so noteworthy about the Democrats throughout this process is the morphing of the charge. Originally, they were claiming that President Trump basically engaged in bribery with the Ukrainians, that he threatened to withhold military aid unless they dug up dirt on Biden for specific purposes of the 2020 election. Then this morphed into he pursued activities that would benefit him in the 2020 election, even if they were really about 2016, the activities that he was pursuing. Now we have a tape that has emerged, apparently, of Trump talking to Lev Parnas, among other people, talking about how he was fine with them gathering information to take out Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch. And this is just breaking news in the last few minutes. I frankly am not particularly shocked by this, but also I'm wondering exactly why that's supremely noteworthy. People seem to be going nuts over it because last I checked, the president does have the executive authority to fire his own ambassadors.
Unquestionably. And look, a lot of the congressional Democrats' arguments on this are just nutty. They've had a lot of, they stand up there and say, can you believe the president disagreed with the foreign policy positions of these lifelong bureaucrats? And they're horrified. No. The bureaucrats, who almost all are hard leftists and embrace the foreign policy of Barack Obama, the bureaucrats, the Democrats are arguing, should be able to set the policy. Well, what utter nonsense. And it is the president who is the commander in chief. It is the president who has the authority to lead the executive branch. The Constitution says that all executive power is vested in the president, and it is the Democrats who are making a very explicit appeal to the deep state. They're saying you can't fire career bureaucrats who disagree with you on public policy matters. And, I'm reminded of actually an anecdote. There's a great book that Ed Meese, you remember, who was the Attorney General for Ronald Reagan, he wrote a book called With Reagan. And he describes when Reagan was president, and the ambassador to the United Nations was Jeane Kirkpatrick. And Jeane Kirkpatrick was visiting a series of Central American countries. And Reagan handwrote letters to the presidents of each of those countries and asked Kirkpatrick to deliver those letters. The State Department sent out a wire, an official diplomatic wire, to our embassies in each of those countries. And that wire said, be advised, Ambassador Kirkpatrick is carrying with her correspondence from POTUS, from the President of the United States, to the respective presidents. Said correspondence has not been through State Department vetting and is therefore not the official policy of the United States. And it was truly a stunning, and actually Meese in his book with Reagan reproduces the actual wire, where the State Department bureaucrats were saying, who is this pesky president? He doesn't get to set foreign policy. We decide what the policy of the United States is. That is utter nonsense. But the Democrats are insisting the president can't set foreign policy. It's just wrong. The president has the ability to set foreign policy, even if the Democrats disagree with it. And the president also has the ability and the responsibility to investigate corruption, particularly serious corruption, in the case of Joe Biden and Burisma that went potentially to the very top of the Obama administration.
Senator Cruz, final question for you. Obviously, a lot of controversy over whether witnesses will be called. Where do you think that stands? Do you think that there will be additional witnesses that are called, or witnesses from the House who are called, when the initial arguments wrap up early next week?
I don't know. I think it is a close call in terms of what the Senate's going to do. Next week, we're going to vote, and it's going to be a vote on whether witnesses are necessary. I think we have heard plenty of evidence, and it is clear the House Democrats have not proven their case. I think we have more than enough to proceed to final judgment and acquit the president. But I don't know if there will be 51 votes for that. If 51 senators say, we've heard enough, let's go to judgment, then the trial ends next week and the president is acquitted. On the other hand, if 51 senators vote and say, we need to hear additional witnesses, we need to hear additional evidence, and the way that would happen, all 47 Democrats will vote that way, and possibly 4 Republicans will join them. If that happens, what I have urged the Republican conference is we need to not follow the pattern of the House. We need to not have a partisan show trial where only one side's witnesses are presented. Instead, we need to respect due process. We need to respect and follow the principle of reciprocity. That means if the prosecution gets a witness, the defense gets a witness. That means if the prosecution gets to call John Bolton, then the president should get to call Hunter Biden and whatever other witnesses they want to call. And I got to say, I do have a high level of confidence that if 51 senators choose to go down the road of calling more witnesses, that we will see the president able to call Hunter Biden and other important witnesses to demonstrate the innocence of the president of these abusive charges that the congressional Democrats have brought against him.
Senator Ted Cruz, thanks so much for standing up in all of this, and we really appreciate your time. You can check out his podcast, his new podcast with our own Michael Knowles, Verdict with Ted Cruz. Go check it out at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you listen to your podcast. Senator Cruz, really appreciate your time, sir.
Take care. God bless.